bronchitis, moaning and groaning, much to my wife's chagrin. That wasn't very normal. But each in his own way, we're all a little different. We got to accept that. This is what they considered eligible for patients back in the 1800s. Look at that. Would we consider them mental patients today? I doubt it. I had a student who had Tourette's syndrome. You know what Tourette's syndrome is? They have an inability to keep from twitching. He had a head twitch. Makes you think. If you had morbid dreams, you might be a candidate. Sleep impairment, my gosh. If I told you my sleep habits, you'd say, lock them up. Constant headaches. Emotional exaggerations. Boy, would I ever console. Excessive religious scruples. I'm a born-again Christian. They'd lock me up. Changes in habits, dress, or cleanliness. Makes you think. Other conditions. Menopausal women. Academic disability. Remember, men-made diagnosis. Did you get that? Only people who made diagnoses in those days were men. Only doctors were men. There's a young lady back there who was one of my students. And but you never had an academic disability, did you? No. But we had a lot of kids in class who were like that, didn't we? We didn't lock them up. We tried the best we could to help them learn. That's the difference between 1843 and 2020. Can I tell a joke? I know it's a serious topic, but you know, some people are just clever. They're not mentally ill, they're just clever. For instance, years ago while going to school, a man had a part-time job in a factory. During his break, he was talking with another factory worker and said, watch me. I can make the boss give me the day off. His coworker asked, and how would you do that? Just watch. He then hanged himself upside down from a rafter in the ceiling. The boss came along and asked him, and just what are you doing? The man replied, can't you see? I'm a light bulb. The boss then said, you've been working too hard. You need to take a day off. At this point, the second worker started to follow the first worker out the door. Pay attention now. The boss shouted to him, and where do you think you're going? He responded, I'm going home too. I can't work in the dark. Some people are mentally ill and some people are just clever. Modern mental health in the United States began in the Utica Lunatic Asylum. Historic event and place now being ignored, except for the tours they have every couple of 3 years. This is what it looked like in the beginning. Notice it had a cupola. If you go there now, it has no cupola. There was a fire, and they never replaced the cupola. So that's what it looks like now. Cupola is missing. Are you all with me? You're awfully quiet. Is everybody awake? Okay. I read a book about Willard State Hospital that described the first patients that arrived there in 1869. Hang on now, this is kind of sad. The first patient was a deformed woman who had been chained for 10 years. 3 men, all in chain irons, one in what looked like a chicken crate about 3.5 feet square. Now, if I wasn't mental and you put me in a crate 3.5 feet square in chains, Within 10 seconds, I'd be a mental patient. They had a lot of people visiting the Old Main back in the 19th century because they tried to, it became a top national tourist center because what they were trying to do was show the public advanced treatment of mentally ill, and also that they were using the government taxpayers' money in good ways. However, imagine it was the most visited place in 1850, an insane asylum. The later 1860s, they stopped that practice of having tourism come in and seeing it all because they finally realized there wasn't any concern for the patient's privacy. Old Main, architecture, treasure. This is how it began. A voluntary petition prepared and signed by 28 physicians that they wanted to have a mental hospital. They requested construction of a state lunatic asylum. Presented it to the state legislature in 1836. 1843, the first hospital in New York State was created, Old Main. Second one in the country, the first one in the state. Dr. Amariah Brigham was the first director. He's known as the father of modern treatment of mentally ill in the United States, right here in Utica, New York. He published a journal called the Journal of Insanity. Today it's still being published from 1844. Still being published. It's called the Journal of Psychiatry. See, they changed the name to make you happy. Okay. Same magazine. He published it with his own money in a print shop at the asylum, and it's still going strong. That's impressive. He also invented a thing called the Utica crib. You got to get ready for this one. And he considered manual labor as treatment, and they decided that a spiritual side of life would help the patients. Duh, took them a while to figure that out. So they instituted moral treatment. Dr. Brigham used Philippe Pinel treatment. This is a gentleman who was a psychiatrist in France, and he decided that moral treatment was the way to handle mental patients way back in 1792. And so Dr. Brigham copied him, he known as the father of modern psychiatry in the world. Dr. Amariah Brigham is the father of modern psychiatry in the United States. As a French gentleman, I laugh when I see him. He looks like he needs help. And that's Dr. Brigham when he was young. There was a school teacher who had an interest in mental patients, and she visited jails where they would put mental patients years ago, and she thought that was terrible, so she advocated for dignity and treatment of mental patients. And she did a lot with the separation of patients, with people who have normal problems and people who are criminally insane. And they decided to separate them. And homicidal maniacs were moved to another facility. That was the beginning of some modern treatment. The third superintendent of the hospital was a Dr. Gray. His mantra was diet, patient care, and comfortable conditions. He diminished the use of the Utica crib. Now, the Utica crib was considered the most modern treatment of mentally ill patients when Dr. Brigham first designed it. And they began the nursing school in 1883. So Dr. Gray started your school. Every once in a while I bring up a photo of that to remind you we're talking about that. I don't want you to forget the the real impressive building that it is. The cost of building the hospital was $10,000. The state that purchased 130 acres, and it fell short of money, so the Utica citizens themselves raised the money, the additional funds of $6,300. You think we could do that today? We were talking earlier about how hard it is to get money from people who have money to support places like these historical societies. And the citizens took it upon themselves. The hospital was not supposed to be built in Utica. I forget now where it was supposed to be built, but they wanted it in Utica because it was something that you wanted to have. It's a modern thing. 1838, they had to appropriate another $50,000. Construction began in 1840, another $75,000. Typical of public projects, isn't it? So the amount of money was $285,000. Water system, gas, and heat was by wood furnace. What would $285,000 be today? Something about like 10 million. In 1847 was the largest asylum in the United States. Please read the following. I gotta bend over on something. They decided early that activity was paramount to treatment. Move, move, move. Do things. Occupational therapy, religion and the arts, law of kindness. This was an actual philosophical attitude toward treatment of mental patients. Law of kindness. You would think that would be automatic, wouldn't you? I mean, shouldn't we have law of kindness all the time? And that became a big improvement. The results were increased happiness and eased suffering. They had a minister there who was in charge of the spiritual part of the patient's life and day, and he did a lot of experimenting with vegetables, and he did a lot of experimenting with a potato. Now the potato blight was going on in those days, and the potato product was becoming extinct, and he developed a potato strain of potatoes that eliminated the blight. Interesting. A little side note. Big step forward. Moral treatment of patients. By gosh, it seems like that would not have to be developed. That would be, from the time I was born, I knew you had to be morally respectful of everyone, but apparently it was a big thing. New concepts. Hard work led to a healthy mind. So they had farming, printing, carpentry, shoemaking, laundry, spinning, weaving, sewing, cleaning, cooking, writing. They published a manual. All this was going on to keep the patients involved. There's a third floor auditorium. Did they have that when you were there, Judy? Third floor auditorium, they put on plays. They'd bring in musical outfits and performers, and they'd put on some of their own. This is a spinning room in 1925. One of the labs. Shoe shop. Patients could work on shoes. My grandfather was a shoemaker. He came from Italy, the shoemaker. Every time I look at that, I think of that. Weaving room in 1925. You remember that? I hope you enjoyed some of these photographs. I stole most of them. And some of them I almost got arrested for taking. I'll tell you that story in a minute. Then a new thing came along. Listen to this. A new thing came along to work with patients. It was first popularized in Germany. In 1891, it was introduced at a juvenile asylum in New Jersey. Finally, the Utica, Maine brought it into use in 1894. Big improvement, big step forward. It's called the rain bath. What do we call it? Shower room. I get a kick out of that. A lot easier to shower 20 guys in a big shower room than it is to take them one at a time and put them in a tub. Amen? Is anybody out there? This is a print shop, and that's where they printed their magazine. They had a monthly magazine called the Opal. Whoops. Contained poetry, stories, published monthly. The money earned went for books for their library. And I have read a copy of the Opal. Fantastic. Just fantastic what these patients wrote, the poems and the stories. Unbelievable. There's a cover of the Opal. They have Pinnell, the world leading psychiatrist, on the cover. That's in the 1850s. Whoops. $1 a year for subscription. Local businesses did advertising in the Opal. That brought in some money, and the money was used to buy books. Good deal. There's a page out of the book that I had. Local people who advertised. Now, everyone in the field of psychiatry knows about the Utica crib. At the time, it was the first big step forward to deal with manic patients, patients that could not be controlled unless they were chained. These patients never saw the light of day. They never got outside to feel the breeze blowing through because they were so bad that they couldn't control them except by chains. Well, they couldn't take them outside and chain them to a tree because the people would see that and think it was awful. So Dr. Brigham came up with this invention to help bring the worst patients outdoors so they could feel the breeze and see the sunshine. It's called the Utica crib. You ready for this? You imagine never having an experience to see the outside or have fresh air. More humane than what? More humane than chains. With our mind of 2020, we look at it and say, oh my gosh, that's awful. But as a step forward, when you think in terms of chains in a basement, so it was